Okay, I'm going to get started with cellular respiration, which we touched on a little bit in chapter 5, but not too much. Like I said, I'm not prepared to be on camera right now, so that's why my camera's off. But cellular respiration is an equation. Sorry. It's a chemical reaction that gets represented by an equation in several different ways. You should have learned the basic equation in regular biology, which is right there. Glucose plus oxygen turns into carbon dioxide plus water plus energy. And that energy molecule is ATP. Now we're going to go into a little more in depth about it. So energy flow and chemical cycling in the biosphere. Animals depend on plants to convert the energy of sunlight to chemical energy of sugars and oxygen. This happens via photosynthesis by organisms called autotrophs, which are mainly plants, but there are some bacterial autotrophs, there are some protists that are autotrophs. And photosynthesis has its own chapter when we talk about plants. But both plant and animal cells perform cellular respiration, which is a chemical process that harvests energy stored in organic molecules like sugar, which is in most of our food, and uses oxygen made from photosynthesis, and it generates ATP. ATP is its end game. We need millions of molecules of ATP for our bodies to function every second of every day. So our bodies are doing this constantly. Here's just an overview of the carbon cycle, basically. Sunlight enters the ecosystem. Plants do photosynthesis to make sugar, the C6H12O6, and oxygen. That sugar and oxygen gets taken in by animals and their own plant cells to perform cellular respiration, and out comes water and carbon dioxide to feed the plants again. Cellular respiration and breathing are closely related, but not the exact same process. Cellular respiration requires a cell to exchange gases with their surroundings. Cells take in oxygen gas from our bloodstream, and cells release waste carbon dioxide gas again into our bloodstream for us to exhale out. And then breathing exchanges these same gases between the blood and the outside air. So cellular respiration happens inside of our cells. Regular respiration, which is the official science name of breathing, happens between our lungs and the environment. Good morning, Marcos. Cellular respiration, its official definition, is a chemical reaction that happens in the mitochondria. It is the main way that chemical energy is harvested from food and converted to ATP. And it's called an aerobic process because it requires oxygen. If you think of the air, you think oxygen, so an aerobic process requires oxygen. There's a lot of aerobic processes. It's not just cellular respiration. It's just any process that requires oxygen. A common fuel molecule for cellular respiration is glucose. Remember, molecules that end in OSE are a sugar. ASE is your enzyme or your protein. It can produce up to 32 ATP molecules for each glucose molecule consumed. And each piece of bread we eat, or pretty much anything with sugar, has millions of glucose molecules in it. The reactants of this chemical reaction are glucose and oxygen. Remember, the reactants are on the left side of a chemical equation. And the products, which in this case are waste products, are carbon dioxide and water. We don't actually need those, so our body gets rid of them for us. So they're called waste products. ATP is also a product, but it is not a waste product. And there are the same pictures that were on the first slide in cellular respiration in equation form and then in word form. Oxygen is important. We need it to live. So during cellular respiration, hydrogen and its bonding electrons change partners from sugar to oxygen and form water as a product. Remember, chemical reactions are just a breaking down and reforming of random chemical bonds. So this is what's happening in the cellular respiration chemical reaction. Chemical reactions like this that transfer electrons are called redox reactions. Water isn't the only thing that is produced. Energy is released as well, which is the whole point of the process. Oxygen atoms attract electrons more strongly than any type of atom, and when the electrons are transferred from glucose to oxygen, potential energy is unlocked and released. We talked about the difference between kinetic and potential energy. Turning potential energy into kinetic energy is something our bodies can actually use. Most of the time, our muscles use it for movement. But we need oxygen to unlock that potential energy so our muscles can work properly. So an overview of cellular respiration, it's an example of a metabolic pathway, which is a series of chemical reactions in cells. All of the reactions involved in cellular respiration can be grouped into three main stages. The first stage is glycolysis, the second stage is the citric acid cycle, and the third is the electron transport chain. These in and of itself are pretty complicated processes. We go over them very lightly. But if you take an AP biology class, which I don't even know if they're offering AP biology next year, but AP biology classes go over them in much more detail. And then majors biology classes, if you go out to major in biology, they will also go over these processes in great detail. For now, we're just skimming the surface. We are doing topics in biology. Glycolysis means the splitting of sugar. Glyco is sugar, and then lysis means to split. One molecule of glucose is split into two molecules of pyruvic acid. And this process alone produces two ATP molecules for every molecule of glucose that is split. So it's not the full 32 ATP molecules that you get if you go through the whole process, all three steps. But you do get a little bit with just glycolysis. The citric acid or the Krebs cycle, it could be known as either, completes the breakdown of glucose all the way to CO2. You can see it's a pretty complicated process. And the electron transport chain, electrons captured from food by the molecules formed in the first two stages, basically fall down the electron transport chain to oxygen, and as a result, energy is released into our cells. So this is the specific step that will turn that kinetic energy, or that potential energy, into kinetic energy that gets used by our cells to do work. Fermentation. Some of your cells can actually work for short periods without oxygen. Fermentation is an anaerobic process. So air means oxygen, anaerobic. You put the AN in front of it, it means without oxygen or no oxygen. Fermentation is an anaerobic process that our body cells can perform to obtain energy from food, but for very, very short periods of time. After functioning anaerobically for about 15 seconds, like I said, short periods of time, muscle cells begin to generate ATP by the process of fermentation. Fermentation relies strictly on glycolysis to produce ATP. Glycolysis, that first step in cellular respiration, does not require oxygen and produces 2 ATP molecules for each glucose broken down into pyruvic acid. And in human muscle cells, lactic acid is a byproduct of this chemical reaction. So you know when you're exercising, your muscles start to run out of oxygen because you're overusing them. Well, your muscles still need ATP to work. So it uses glycolysis, just that first step, to produce a little bit of ATP, just enough to survive, so it doesn't shut down. Fermentation alone is able to sustain many types of microorganisms, so very, very small ones. The lactic acid produced by microbes using fermentation is used to produce a lot of our food. Cheese, sour cream, yogurt, soy sauce, pickles, olives, sausage, meat products, beer, wine. All of these products use the process of fermentation to be made. Yeast is a microscopic fungus that uses a different type of fermentation and produces CO2 and ethyl alcohol instead of lactic acid. This is what you guys are going to be looking at in your lab next week. This type of fermentation, called alcoholic fermentation, is used to produce beer, wine, and bread. And at the bottom, that is the specific chemical reaction of alcoholic fermentation. And if we were in class, we would actually be doing this, but we are doing it online for now.